Have you ever been erased from your own family's story? At my father's retirement gala, I was publicly humiliated, kicked out of the VIP table, and replaced by my stepmother's daughter. But when my quiet husband revealed who he really was, the entire room gasped, and everything changed. The crystal ballroom at the Grandview Hotel shimmered with wealth and prestige that night. Chandeliers spilled golden light over ivory-draped tables, each crowned with orchid centerpieces that looked like they belonged in a luxury magazine spread. This wasn't just a retirement party. It was my father's farewell performance after 30 years as a celebrated school principal. Every influential name in education was their board members, donors, even reporters ready to applaud the man they thought had built a flawless legacy. Marcus and I arrived a little late, thanks to traffic. I smoothed my navy dress, the nicest one I owned, while my husband checked his phone one more time, his face unreadable. "Everything okay?" I asked. He only squeezed my hand and said, "Nothing to worry about." I didn't know then how much weight those words carried. At the entrance, my father stood in a tailored Tom Ford suit, his arm around Patricia, his glamorous wife of 4 years. She sparkled in a sequined gown, her diamond necklace catching the light like a spotlight. They looked perfect, as though their lives had no cracks. When he greeted me, his voice boomed warmly, but his eyes, they didn't quite match the smile. And Patricia? Her eyes flicked over my dress with the kind of polite disdain only she could deliver. She wasted no time reminding me that Jessica, her daughter, the successful one, had already been there an hour, networking with the important people. The way she emphasized important told me exactly where she thought I ranked. I should have sensed it then. The way Patricia's lips curled when she gestured toward the tables, the way my father avoided looking directly at me. The subtle tension in Marcus's posture as his phone buzzed again. Something was off. Something was coming. I walked into that ballroom expecting to celebrate my father's legacy. Instead, I was about to be erased from it entirely. And I had no idea that the humiliation I felt in that moment would set the stage for a truth so explosive, it would shatter everything my father thought he built. That night was supposed to be his grand finale. But it became the night my family's story rewrote itself forever. The place cards at the VIP table glittered like silent judgments, each one a name written in elegant script. My father, Patricia, board members, major donors, and of course Jessica Morrison. But no Olivia Hamilton. I blinked, checked again, then a third time. Nothing. My name had vanished from the very table where I was supposed to sit, where my father had promised I'd belong. "There must be some mistake," I murmured, forcing a smile even as my stomach dropped. Patricia appeared at my side like a predator sensing weakness, her voice syrupy but sharp. "Oh, didn't Robert tell you? We had to make some last-minute adjustments. Space constraints, you understand? Space constraints." 8 chairs, 7 cards, and the one empty seat right beside Jessica, her manicured hand resting possessively on its back. She looked up with a perfectly rehearsed smile. "Oh, Olivia, didn't see you there. Don't you look comfortable?" Her eyes flicked over my dress, the same way one might glance at a discount rack. Patricia pounced on the moment. "Jessica's already been making such valuable connections tonight. She has the kind of presence the board respects." It only made sense. "But I'm his daughter," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Of course you are, dear," Patricia said smoothly, "which is why we've placed you at table 12. You'll be with the other teachers from the district. Won't that be nice? You'll have so much in common. Table 12. The back corner half hidden by a pillar, polyester cloth instead of silk. The exile table." I turned to my father, my voice trembling but steady enough. "Dad, why am I not at your table?" He shifted uncomfortably, tugged at his tie. "Jessica has connections that could really benefit the fund. You understand, don't you? It's just business. Just business." My own father reducing me to a liability in front of the entire room. Marcus's jaw tightened beside me. "This is her father's retirement dinner," he said, calm but firm. "And we're so glad you both could come," Patricia cut in before Dad could answer, already turning her attention back to the donors. Jessica leaned closer to David Chun, the chairman of the Education Fund Board, laughing as if she'd already won. I stood frozen, staring at the empty seat that should have been mine. Watching Jessica slip into my place at the table, my father's life, and now the future I'd been promised. Marcus's phone buzzed again.
He glanced at the screen, and for just a second, something flickered in his expression. Satisfaction. "Come on," I whispered, tugging his arm.
Let's just go to table 12. But inside I was unraveling. Years of devotion to education, my father's legacy, my own achievements, none of it mattered. Not when compared to Jessica's law degree and her shiny red designer dress. As we sat down at the teacher's table, Patricia's voice carried across the ballroom, deliberately loud enough for me to hear. "This is Jessica, my daughter, senior associate at Foster and Associates. She just won a multi-million-dollar case. Such ambition." A beat later, her tone dropped with calculated disdain. "And that's Robert's daughter, Olivia. She teaches at PS 48, the public school." She said public, like it was a contagious disease. The laughter from the VIP table echoed like a gavel. My sentence had been handed down: teacher, ordinary, unworthy. What I didn't realize then was that this exclusion, the moment my father chose prestige over his own daughter, was the exact spark that would ignite his downfall. The lights dimmed slightly as my father stepped onto the stage, commanding the microphone with the same authority that had carried him through decades as a principal. The room hushed, 200 faces turning toward him, waiting for his words. This was his moment, the celebration of his legacy. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he began, his voice rich and practiced. "As I stand here closing this chapter of my career, I'm overwhelmed with gratitude." He went down the list: school board, donors, colleagues. The applause rose and fell with each name. And then came the part I dreaded and hoped for all at once, the personal acknowledgments. "My beautiful wife, Patricia," he said, his voice softening, "has been my rock these past 4 years." The crowd clapped politely. Patricia smiled her perfectly rehearsed smile. "And I'm especially proud tonight to have Jessica Morrison here, Patricia's daughter, who I've come to think of as my own." The words landed like a blade. As my own, the applause grew louder this time, and Jessica stood with theatrical modesty, waving like a politician. Her crimson dress caught every light, making her shine like the centerpiece of the evening. "Jessica recently made senior associate at Foster and Associates," my father continued, his pride swelling, "the youngest in the firm's history. Harvard Law summa cum laude. She represents everything we hope education can achieve: ambition, excellence, and the drive to reach the very top." The room erupted again, clapping, nodding, smiling. The photographer snapped rapid shots of Jessica as if she were the guest of honor. I waited, breath caught in my chest. Surely now he would turn the spotlight my way. Surely he would say, "And my daughter Olivia, who followed me into education." Surely he would at least acknowledge my existence. But he moved on, straight to a thank you for the catering staff. My name never passed his lips. My stomach twisted as the realization sank in. In front of the entire district, donors and reporters, my father had erased me from his story. Mrs. Chun, the middle school math teacher at my table, touched my arm softly. "That was expected." "I know," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Inside, memories collided: my dad missing my college graduation for a cruise with Patricia, forgetting my birthday 2 years in a row, downplaying my Teacher of the Year award, while bragging about Jessica's bonuses. Across the room, Jessica basked in the applause, leaning into the limelight as though she had been born for it. Patricia dabbed at her eyes, her performance flawless. And my father, he stood tall, proud, smiling, as though he'd chosen his real daughter at last. Not me, not the one who followed him into classrooms, who carried his legacy. No, tonight I was invisible. And yet that silence, his silence, was the moment the seed of his undoing was planted. Because the world had just seen him erase his own daughter. And someone in that room wasn't going to let it stand. After the applause for Jessica died down, my father adjusted the microphone with that same commanding presence he'd used for decades at assemblies and graduations. But this time his expression shifted into something more serious. I recognized it instantly: his important announcement face. The one he used for policy changes, budget approvals, even when he'd told me years ago that he was marrying Patricia. "Now," he said, his voice booming across the ballroom, "for the evening's major announcement." The crowd stilled. Even the clink of glasses and low murmurs faded. This was the moment he wanted captured, the legacy he wanted etched into memory. As you know, he continued, the Hamilton Education Fund has received a generous commitment of $5 million from Techedu Corporation. A ripple of impressed murmurs swept the room. 5 million was no small figure. Heads nodded, eyes widened, donors leaned forward with interest. This fund will provide scholarships and resources for emerging educational leaders. And tonight, my father said, his chest swelling with pride, I am thrilled to announce who will take my seat on the Fund's board of directors when I retire. My breath caught. This was it, the position he had promised me 3 years ago. His exact words still echoed in my memory. When I retire, Olivia, you'll carry on the family tradition. Your classroom experience will be invaluable. I sat taller, my pulse racing, my fingers gripping the edge of the table. After careful consideration, he declared, I am delighted to announce that Jessica Morrison will be joining the board as my successor. The room erupted in applause. Chairs scraped as Jessica rose gracefully, her red dress shimmering as though she were stepping into destiny. She placed a hand over her heart, pretending to be humbled by the honor, though her smirk betrayed the truth. This had been planned all along. Patricia dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, the picture of a proud mother. Flashbulbs went off as the photographer captured Jessica's triumphant smile beside my father's glowing face. Meanwhile, I sat frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. 3 years I had spent 3 years preparing. Researching scholarship models, drafting proposals, designing mentorship programs for teachers. Every spare hour I had poured into being ready for this role, the role that was supposed to be mine. And with a single sentence, he had erased all of it. Jessica's voice carried across the table. I'm honored, truly. I already have a comprehensive proposal in mind focusing on leadership development and administrative advancement. Leadership development. Administrative advancement. She had no idea what teachers actually needed. No mention of classroom supplies, teacher retention, student resources, none of it. She was already planning to turn the fund into a corporate ladder. Beside me, Marcus's hand gripped mine so tightly it almost hurt. His voice was low, steady. That position was yours. I know, I whispered back, the words burning like acid. But it wasn't just the board seat. This was bigger. This was my father declaring, in front of 200 people, that I wasn't worthy. That my decade of teaching, my awards, my students, my sacrifices, they meant nothing? Not compared to Jessica's law degree and shiny career. As the applause thundered around me, something inside me broke. The humiliation of the VIP table had been sharp, but this was betrayal. Because this time, it wasn't just Patricia's scheming or Jessica's arrogance. It was my own father choosing someone else to carry our family's legacy. And in that moment, as the cameras flashed and Jessica soaked in her victory, I realized something. This wasn't just an exclusion. It was a declaration. I had been cut out of my father's story completely. But what none of them realized, what Jessica, Patricia, and even my father couldn't, was that this very betrayal would become the crack that shattered everything they thought was secure. Because my husband wasn't just quietly watching from the sidelines, he was waiting. And the moment was coming. The applause for Jessica's appointment still echoed across the ballroom when I felt something inside me snap. My entire life I had swallowed the slights, the dismissals, the quiet humiliations. But this betrayal, this public erasure was too much. Before I knew it, my legs were moving. My heels clicked across the polished floor, each step louder than the last, carrying me straight to the VIP table. Conversations faltered, forks hovered midair, and 7 pairs of eyes snapped toward me. Yes, Dad, I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled. We need to talk. The entire table froze. Patricia's perfect smile thinned into a razor's edge. Jessica leaned back in her chair, smirk tugging at her lips. And my father, he didn't even meet my eyes. Not now, Olivia, he said in that same commanding tone he'd used on misbehaving students for decades. You're making a scene, now. I stood taller, forcing my voice to carry. Because this can't wait. Patricia's voice sliced through the tension like cold steel wrapped in silk. You're embarrassing yourself. Please, don't ruin this evening for your father. I locked eyes with her. Am I embarrassing myself? Or are you embarrassed because the truth doesn't fit into your picture-perfect narrative? A murmur rippled through nearby tables. Phones began to rise, cameras discreetly angled in my direction. That position was promised to me 3 years ago, I continued, turning back to my father. Your exact words, when I retire, Olivia, you'll carry on the family tradition. Did you forget? Or did I just stop being your daughter when I chose classrooms over courtrooms? Jessica laughed softly, the sound sharp and deliberate. Olivia, please. Managing a multi-million-dollar fund requires more than good intentions. You're a teacher, not a leader. I turned to her, heat rising in my chest. Leadership? Try standing in front of 28 eight-year-olds with different learning needs. Try buying supplies with your own money, staying up nights writing lesson plans, or holding a crying child who has no one else to turn to. That's leadership. Patricia's smile snapped into a sneer. Real-world experience is what matters here. Jessica brings that. You bring sentiment. Real world, I shot back. I work 60-hour weeks for less than your dress probably cost. I've taught children who came to school hungry, who didn't speak English, who were written off before they even had a chance. That's the real world, Patricia. The one you don't know exists. By now, half the ballroom had turned to watch. Someone whispered, "That's his daughter?" The photographer's camera flashed again and again, documenting every second of my rebellion. This is humiliating, my father hissed, finally breaking. You need to leave, now. No, what's humiliating, I said, my voice steady as steel. Is giving an education board seat to someone who's never set foot in a classroom? What as humiliating is erasing your own daughter because she wasn't flashy enough for your legacy? Patricia's hand shot up. Security! 2 guards began moving toward me. My father's face burned crimson. Jessica's smirk widened, as though this spectacle proved her point. But before the guards could reach me, a calm, controlled voice cut through the chaos. That won't be necessary, Marcus. And in that moment, the humiliation shifted. The spotlight began to turn. The ballroom buzzed with whispers as the 2 security guards loomed closer, their hands hovering near my arms. My father's face was crimson, Patricia's eyes glinted with triumph, and Jessica sat back smugly, convinced I was about to be dragged out like an unruly child. But then Marcus's voice, calm, steady, unshakable. That won't be necessary. The guards froze, almost instinctively. Marcus didn't raise his voice, but it carried. He stepped forward, his presence so composed it shifted the energy in the room. For the first time all night, the attention moved away from Patricia's theatrics and Jessica's gloating, and landed on him. Robert, Marcus said evenly, addressing my father with quiet authority. Before you send your daughter out of the room, perhaps you should consider one thing. And what's that? My father snapped, his voice still carrying the weight of command, though cracks were forming around the edges. Marcus took a slow step closer, his gaze never wavering. Do you actually know who your primary sponsor is? Or what conditions they placed on this so-called generous donation? A hush fell across the ballroom. Even Patricia faltered, her carefully curated mask slipping for just a second. What kind of nonsense is this? She scoffed, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. Answer the question, Marcus pressed. Do you know who you signed a contract with? My father squared his shoulders. Of course, Techedu Corporation. Some executive. What does it matter? Marcus's mouth curved into the faintest hint of a smile. It matters. Because you don't seem to realize what you've just done. David Jun, the board chairman, shifted in his seat, pulling out his phone. His expression sharpened as he scrolled through something Marcus must have already sent him. What are you implying? My father demanded. I'm not implying anything, Marcus replied smoothly. I'm stating facts. The Techedu sponsorship came with explicit contractual obligations. Section 7.3. Fund management must prioritize classroom educator experience. Section 7.4. Board positions should reflect diverse educational backgrounds with preference for active teachers. He paused deliberately, letting the words settle like thunder rolling across the room. Which means, Marcus continued, that by announcing Jessica as your successor, someone with 0 classroom experience, you've already breached your contract. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Phones lit up as more guests began checking their emails. Several heads turned toward Jessica, whose confident smile faltered as her complexion drained. "This is ridiculous," Patricia hissed, her voice rising with panic. "You can't just quote legal jargon and expect people to believe." "Actually, I can," Marcus interrupted gently, his tone never breaking from its calm precision. "Because it's not legal jargon. It's the exact contract Robert signed 6 weeks ago. I emailed it to Mr. Chun just before this speech." All eyes turned to the board chairman. David Chun stood abruptly, his expression grim. "Robert, we need to talk, now." My father's face went pale, his bluster evaporating as he reached for the document in Chun's hands. Jessica leaned forward, scanning frantically, her lawyer instincts kicking in far too late. "You didn't read the fine print, did you?" Marcus asked quietly, though his words carried. "You assumed the money was unconditional. You assumed prestige mattered more than purpose. And you assumed wrong. The room was utterly still now, 200 guests hanging on every word. Even the waitstaff had frozen mid-service. I stood rooted in place, my breath caught in my throat. For years, Marcus had been my steady, supportive husband, the quiet one in the background, but right now he wasn't background. He was commanding the stage with a presence even my father couldn't rival. And for the first time that night, the power in the room shifted. Patricia's smirk had vanished. Jessica's confidence cracked. My father's authority slipped like sand through his fingers, and my Marcus was just getting started. For a few long seconds, the ballroom was frozen. My father clutched the contract, his eyes scanning desperately, while Patricia leaned over his shoulder, whispering frantic questions. Jessica, normally so composed, looked like a deer trapped in headlights. The board chairman's phone buzzed nonstop as donors and reporters scrambled for clarity. And Marcus? He stood calm at the podium, a man who had just shifted an entire room without raising his voice. "Let me simplify this," he said, his tone sharp but controlled. "The Techadu Corporation's $5 million donation is conditional. It requires leadership from active educators. Tonight, by announcing Jessica, Robert has already violated those terms, which means—" He paused, his eyes locking on my father. "The funding is at risk." A collective gasp swept the room. Patricia jumped to her feet. "This is absurd." "You're twisting words. Techadu doesn't care who sits on that board. They care about influence and connections." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his gaze cutting into her. "Interesting assumption. And that's been your mistake all along. You assumed. You assumed money was enough. You assumed prestige mattered more than purpose. But you never stopped to ask who Techadu really is," Jessica scoffed, though her voice wavered. "So what, some nameless executive in Silicon Valley? None of this changes the fact that my qualifications speak for themselves." "Qualifications?" Marcus raised a brow. "Tell me, Jessica, name one educational theory. Just one classroom management technique. One learning disability accommodation." Her lips parted, but no words came. Silence stretched, thick and humiliating. "That's what I thought," Marcus said coolly. David Chun cleared his throat, addressing the room. "I've reviewed the contract, Mr. Hamilton." He looked at my father. "Marcus is correct. The clauses are very clear. This board appointment violates the agreement." My father's face drained of color. No, that can't be." "You didn't read it," Marcus interrupted. "You skimmed, delegated, assumed." "But assumptions don't hold up in legal agreements." Jessica's composure crumbled. "I did review it." She blurted, her voice higher than usual. "I skimmed it. It seemed standard." A wave of whispers surged through the room. "She skimmed a $5 million contract?" someone muttered. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice low but cutting. "You skimmed the very document that determined your entire career path. And in doing so, you destroyed your own credibility." Patricia clutched her daughter's hand. "This is manipulation. He's tricking you all. He's nobody. He drives a Honda Civic, shops at Costco, and hides behind my daughter's mediocrity to feel superior." I flinched. But Marcus didn't. Instead, he straightened his posture, his calmness radiating like a shield. "Since we're discussing identities," he said, his voice growing stronger, "let me clarify something. My name is Marcus Hamilton." He looked directly at me, then at the crowd. "Yes, I took my wife's last name when we married." Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to honor the only Hamilton who truly understands what education means. My heart lurched.
He'd never told me that. Gasps echoed across the room.
Patricia blinked rapidly, clearly trying to piece it together. What are you talking about? Marcus's gaze swept the audience. 5 years ago, I watched my wife cry after spending her entire paycheck on books for her students. That same night, she stayed up until 3 a.m. writing individualized lesson plans. I saw her sacrifice, her dedication, her brilliance. And I realized something. Teachers like her deserve more. They deserve real support, not empty praise, not crumbs. Real resources. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. So, I built something. A company designed to make sure teachers were never invisible again. David Chun's eyes widened. Wait. Marcus nodded once, decisively. I am the founder and CEO of Tachedu Corporation. The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, phones snapping photos, live streams exploding with comments. Chairs scraped as people stood for a better view. The photographer's flash went off like fireworks, capturing the exact moment the Hamilton family's carefully constructed facade collapsed. Patricia's face went sheet white. No, that's impossible. Jessica shook her head violently. You're lying. You can't be... But Marcus wasn't flustered. He simply pulled out his phone, tapped a button, and the massive screen behind him flickered to life. The Techedu logo glowed, followed by a photo. Marcus at a recent education summit, standing beside other industry leaders. His name clearly printed beneath. Marcus Hamilton, founder and CEO, Tachedu Corporation. Silence fell like a hammer. This is ridiculous, my father sputtered, though his voice lacked conviction. You deceived us. You lied about who you were. Marcus shook his head. No, I never lied. You never asked. You assumed a quiet man who supported his wife must be insignificant. Your prejudice blinded you to the truth. Jessica's phone buzzed and she answered out of reflex. Her voice carried across the hushed ballroom. Yes, Mr. Richardson. I understand. The live stream? Already over 50,000 views. Damage control? Yes, sir. Tomorrow morning. She hung up, her hand trembling. The mighty senior associate had just been reduced to a panicked intern caught in a storm she created. Marcus looked out at the sea of stunned faces. Tonight was supposed to be about Robert Hamilton's legacy. Instead, it has revealed his true values: networking over knowledge, prestige over purpose, appearances over authenticity. But Techedu was never about that. Techedu was about teachers. And tonight, it will remain about teachers. He turned to David Chun, effective immediately. Techedu withdraws all funding from the Hamilton Education Fund. Gasps echoed again. Patricia cried out. My father staggered into his chair, his entire career crumbling in minutes. And instead, Marcus continued, his eyes locking on me, I am establishing a new foundation, the Olivia Hamilton Excellence in Teaching Fund, $5 million. Managed by educators, for educators, by the people who actually understand what education means. The teachers in the back rose to their feet, applauding through tears. One by one, others joined until the ballroom thundered with clapping, not for my father, not for Jessica, but for the truth. And me? I stood in stunned silence, tears burning in my eyes as I realized the man I married wasn't just my partner. He was my shield, my champion, and tonight my revenge. For a moment, the ballroom was a living storm. Gasps, whispers, frantic phone calls. Donors shifted in their seats, teachers exchanged stunned glances, and reporters typed furiously, their screens glowing with breaking headlines. My father sat rigid, his face pale, the contract shaking slightly in his hand. Meanwhile, Marcus stood tall, unshaken, commanding the stage as if he'd been preparing for this moment his whole life. Let me be perfectly clear, he said, his voice even but absolute. Techedu will not allow its resources to be managed by people who see teachers as less than.
Tonight, the Hamilton Education Fund ceases to exist.
In its place, I am establishing the Olivia Hamilton Excellence in Teaching Foundation. My name. Spoken aloud, attached to something real, something powerful. The room erupted again, this time with applause, not the polite, calculated applause that had followed Jessica's appointment, but raw, genuine clapping. It began at table 12, the teacher's table, my table, and spread outward like fire. Soon, nearly half the room was on their feet. Marcus waited until the noise softened before continuing. This foundation will do what the old fund never could: serve teachers directly, grants for classroom supplies, scholarships for advanced degrees, mental health resources to fight burnout, practical support designed by those who know education from the inside. He looked directly at me, his voice lowering with sincerity. And it will be chaired by Olivia Hamilton, the woman who embodies what real education means. Tears blurred my vision. Me, not erased, not dismissed, centered, honored. David Chun rose to his feet. Marcus, on behalf of the board, I'd be honored to serve under Mrs. Hamilton's leadership. Several other board members nodded, murmuring agreement. Patricia leapt up, her face twisted with desperation. This is theft! You're hijacking Robert's fund, his legacy. Marcus's expression didn't shift. No, I'm salvaging what matters from a legacy built on appearances. The real legacy of education doesn't belong to Robert Hamilton or Jessica Morrison. It belongs to every teacher who stays late to tutor, every parent who sacrifices for their child, every student who finds hope in a classroom. That's who this foundation is for. The crowd roared again, louder this time. Reporters snapped photos, donors whispered among themselves, calculating where their loyalties should fall. Marcus raised a hand. And to show we're serious, Tichedu will match every donation made to the foundation tonight, dollar for dollar. Immediately, pledges rang out. 10,000 from the local teachers' union. 20,000 from the Parent-Teacher Association. 50,000 from the Johnson Foundation. Phones lit up with donation confirmations. Within minutes, the total had climbed to over $300,000, instantly doubled by Marcus's matching pledge. Nearly $1 million raised in the span of an evening. Patricia's voice cracked as she shrieked, "This won't stand, we'll sue." Marcus didn't even look at her. "Please do." Principal's wife calls teachers embarrassments. I'm sure the press will love that headline. Laughter rippled through the audience. The tide had fully turned. Jessica's phone buzzed again. She answered reluctantly, her voice hollow. "Yes, Mr. Richardson, I understand. Reputational risk. No, I'll prepare my resignation letter." She hung up slowly, her hand trembling. The once celebrated rising star now looked like a collapsed shadow of herself. My father remained silent, staring down at the tablecloth as though it might swallow him whole. Marcus stepped aside from the podium, his voice carrying one last thunderclap across the room. Tonight was supposed to honor Robert Hamilton. Instead, it revealed the truth, but from that truth comes something better. A foundation built not on prestige, but on purpose. Not for appearances, but for impact. His eyes found mine again. This isn't revenge, Olivia. It's restoration. The teachers at table 12 rose first, tears streaking faces, clapping until their hands reddened. Then donors, then reporters. Then strangers who simply understood the weight of what had just happened. The Olivia Hamilton Excellence in Teaching Foundation had been born not in a boardroom, not in secrecy, but in fire, in truth, in defiance of those who thought teachers were nothing. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter. I felt like the beginning of something unstoppable. By the time Marcus and I left the ballroom, the story had already gone viral. Clips of Patricia sneering that I was just a teacher were spreading across social media like wildfire. Jessica's smug declaration that not everyone is meant for greatness, some are just teachers, had become a meme within hours. And Marcus's reveal, my quiet husband calmly dismantling my father's empire, was being replayed on every news station by morning. The hashtag teachers deserve respect trended nationally overnight. The fallout was swift and merciless. 3 days later, the school board issued a formal statement. In light of recent events, Robert Hamilton has accelerated his retirement effective immediately. Accelerated was a polite way of saying his reputation was shattered beyond repair. The man who once lectured others about leadership had been exposed as the principal who publicly belittled his own daughter and, by extension, every teacher in the profession. Patricia tried damage control, but the live stream had captured every insult, every sneer. Donors withdrew support from any cause she was associated with. Country clubs quietly distanced themselves. She was reduced to bitterly defending herself in gossip columns, where her words only dug her deeper. Jessica's collapse was even harsher. Within a week, Her law firm had put her partnership track on indefinite hold after multiple education clients severed ties, citing reputational risk. Legal blogs dissected her failure to read the Techedu contract, calling it the most expensive scam in corporate law. Soon after, the State Bar announced an inquiry into her public comments about teachers, citing ethics violations. She fled to a smaller firm in Connecticut, specializing in real estate law, a far cry from her dreams of high-profile corporate litigation. Her once flawless LinkedIn profile quietly erased Harvard Law from its headline, "The shine of prestige dulled forever." "My father?" He called once, his voice hollow, asking to meet in person to apologize. But when I laid out terms family therapy, a public apology to educators, and proof he actually understood what he'd done wrong, he balked. Said it was ridiculous. And just like that, the conversation ended. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel crushed by his rejection. I felt free. The public, however, embraced me. Teachers across the country sent letters. Parents emailed their thanks. Former students reached out, some in tears, telling me they'd always known their teachers mattered, but now the world finally saw it too. The Olivia Hamilton Excellence in Teaching Foundation exploded with support. Within the first week, we received more than 50 sponsorship offers from corporations eager to align themselves with respect for educators. Donations poured in faster than we could process them. We had to hire staff just to manage applications. But through it all, I still taught my third graders at PS 48 every morning. 28 pairs of eyes greeted me, and I remembered why this all mattered. The foundation was powerful, yes, but the classroom, that was where the magic happened. And Marcus? He remained the same steady, grounded man who had always been at my side. The world saw him as a CEO, a titan who destroyed an empire with a single announcement. But I still saw the man who made late-night tea while I graded papers, who never let me doubt my worth, who believed in me long before anyone else did. The gala had begun as my father's triumph, but in the end it became his undoing, and mine, it became my beginning. Looking back now, I realize the most important part of that night wasn't Marcus's reveal, or even the birth of the foundation. It was the moment I finally understood that my worth had never been tied to my father's approval. For 35 years, I had measured myself through his eyes, chasing recognition he was never willing to give. Every time he dismissed my teaching, every birthday he forgot, every holiday overshadowed by Jessica's achievements, I thought if I worked harder, if I accomplished more, maybe then I'd be enough. But that night in the ballroom taught me a lesson that took decades to learn. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. Teaching isn't less than law. Caring isn't less than competing. Service isn't less than status, they're just different paths. And different isn't worse, it's everything. For years I set the hardest boundary of all, not with my family, but with myself. Against doubt, against comparison. Against believing that choosing purpose over prestige made me small. Marcus didn't save me that night. What he did was reveal what had been true all along, that my work mattered. That the love of 28 third graders, the thank you notes from parents, the students who discovered they could read, or could believe in themselves, those victories were as powerful as any courtroom win or corporate deal. The foundation has grown beyond anything we imagined. We've awarded scholarships, funded classrooms, and supported teachers in ways I used to dream about. But through it all, I've stayed in my classroom. Because the foundation exists to support teachers, and how could I truly lead it if I stopped being one? Every time I walk into PS 48 and see my students' faces light up, I know I chose right. Different wasn't less than. Different was mine. My father's legacy ended in scandal. Jessica's career stalled in disgrace. Patricia vanished into bitterness. But me? I found freedom. I found strength. I found a life where I no longer need to beg for a seat at the VIP table, because I finally understood that my worth doesn't come from the table at all. It comes from the classroom, from the work, from knowing who I am and never apologizing for it again. So what did I learn? That self-worth isn't measured by salary, prestige, or someone else's approval. It's defined by how you choose to live, love, and stand tall in your truth. My father lost his legacy, but I gained freedom, respect, and a foundation built on purpose. If you've ever been dismissed, undervalued, or erased from your own family story. Remember, their blindness doesn't dim your light. Thank you for watching my story. Please like, subscribe, and share your own experiences in the comments. I read every single one. Together, let's prove that different isn't less than.